Welcome back to the third module of the Budget 2 course. I hope you did well with those previous questions in the previous module. In this module, we are going to look at some tips for communicating with auditors. At first, we're going to start with a lot of things. Preparation is key. As mentioned in the COZO presentation and many modules before, it is important to have proper internal controls. Important part controls is to have multiple levels of reviews. So not one person, separation of duties, not one person is preparing financial reports, drawdowns. You're having a supervisor review their work. Another important control is to have an accounting management system. As mentioned in several of my previous modules, timely posting of expenditures and purchase orders is key to properly using your accounting management system. Another key was mentioned earlier too, was having proper documentation. As I mentioned before, proper documentation helps you with your audit, as when time passes, we forget things. It is easier if you maintain the documentation as it goes, so that when it's requested, you could look at it, organize it, and provide it to the auditors if needed. One thing we use here is we have a pre-audit meeting several months before our audit usually. We bring in our internal audit department, our accounting department, and any other parties needed to establish the roles and responsibilities during the audit. And we establish specifically for the single audit, a central person to be contact for the auditors. We also set up regular meetings with everyone in there and our auditors so that everyone is aware of any outstanding items during the audit process. So let's go over how we should respond to auditors' requests, specifically here, accounting department. As I mentioned before, we should have someone as the point of contact for the auditors. This person might not do all the work, but they are communicating with the auditors and then distributing the work as they need to see. Any requests the auditors have should be made your top priority. You probably have regular day-to-day duties, but when the auditors request something, it should be coming to the top of your list so that they are provided the documentation as required. Someone in a senior level accountant or accounting manager, controller should be reviewing the documentation provided to the auditor. The documentation should provide adequate backup while still being clear and concise. More is not always better. You got to make sure you're efficient, that everything can be traced back, that you're providing this information to the person that's going to audit this, and they should be able to understand it without you going back and explaining it to them. It should show the whole cycle of the transaction. For expenditures, you should be able to go to see the purchase order, the invoice, and then the payment coming out of your bank account. Next, we're going to go over how the project director should respond to audit requests. Under the uniform guidance and in recent years in the audits, I've noticed a lot more emphasis on the performance in the single audit. They're not just looking at the incoming transactions, the drawdowns, the expenditures. They're looking at how you're meeting your goals and your objectives. So this means as you go throughout the year, you should be maintaining proper folders and files. And before the audit, if it's decided that you're going to be a major program that they're auditing, you should make sure you organize your student files and any other files in a proper and concise manner. With the performance, any students selected, they're going to want to see that they're meeting the criteria and demographic of students that you have stated in your GAN. And as stated with the accounting, any requests for the auditors should be made top priority. I know we all get busy with our regular jobs, but when the auditors are in, we really want to make sure they're not waiting on stuff other than the fact that we're working on it and researching it. So we don't want to be rushing ourselves and just trying to blow them off, but we don't want to, in the sense, keep working on stuff and pushing them to the back of our workload either. So let's go over resolving some disputes with auditors. Important part, obviously, is gaining a complete understanding of what their auditor is disputing. We don't want to just go and not understand and not answer their question. It's important that we have a level of communication and understanding with them so that we're working in an efficient manner to understand what they're disputing and then resolving that as we see fit. Part of that is asking for it in writing if possible. I've noticed a lot of times when they come speak to me about it, if I ask them to write it down, it might resolve itself. They might say, this is more petty, so we don't need to pursue it. Or they might go through it a few times or review it themselves, and it will become more clear to me than them just telling me. After we understand what the dispute is, we should research it completely. If you have an internal team, as I mentioned before, we should have a point of contact with them, but that doesn't mean that they're doing the entire workload. You should have a team behind you. They can distribute the work and speak through it about that we're researching completely so that we're giving them a complete and whole answer to this dispute. This brings us into the uniform guidance again. In the uniform guidance, it has audit requirements, and part of that is audit findings follow-up. You're responsible for the follow-up and corrective action of all audit findings. You must prepare a summary schedule of prior audit findings, which should include the fiscal year the finding initially occurred, and a corrective action for current year findings. And both should include reference number the auditor assigns to the findings in accordance with 2 CFR 200.516. Continuing on with the summary schedule of prior audit findings. When finding is fully corrected, the schedule need only list that the findings and state that the corrective action was taken. When audit findings were not corrected or were only partially corrected, the summary schedule must describe the reasons for the findings recurrence and planned corrective action and any partial action taken. When the corrective action taken is significantly different from the corrective action previously reported in a plan, the summary schedule must provide an explanation why that deviance happened. When the auditee, so that would be you and your institution, believes the audit findings are no longer valid or do not warrant further action, the reasons for this position must be described in the summary schedule. A valid reason for an audit not warranting further action is that all the following have occurred. 2 years have passed since the audit report in which the finding occurred and was submitted. The federal awarding agency or pass-through entity is not currently following up with the auditee or on the audit finding, and a management decision was not issued. So let's go over the corrective action plan. At the completion of the audit, the auditee must prepare a corrective action plan to address each audit finding included in the current year's auditor's report. And part of this is documents separate from the auditor's findings described in the audit findings. So this is 2 CFR 200.516 as mentioned before. This corrective action plan must provide the name of the contact person or names of its multiple people responsible for this corrective action. The plan, the actual plan itself, the corrective action you're going to take, and the anticipated date that you are going to complete this corrective action. If the auditee does not agree with the findings or believe corrective action is not required, the plan must include an explanation and specific reasons why you do not agree or do not believe corrective action is required. This will conclude this module of communicating with the auditors. Any questions can be forwarded to Nichelle Knox at the email address provided on this slide. There will be some questions for you related to this module following. After you've completed the questions, we will be back to cover the next module, which will cover our closeout procedures and reporting requirements. Thank you, and I will see you in the next module.